Hello everyone, here is Afra Syab. Today we are going to solve Cambridge IGCSE Physics Paper 4 Theory Extended held on October-November 2019 and paper code is 0625 with variant 42. So let's start from question number 1. Question number 1. Figure 1.1 is the top view of a rectangular paddling pool of constant depth. The pool is filled with seawater. Here is the figure 1.1 and we can see that the depth remains constant and it's the length that is 44 meter and width is 20.0 meters. Part A. The volume of the seawater in the pool is 264 meter cube. Calculate the depth of the pool. Here we have to calculate the depth of pool. We know that volume is the product of length, breadth and depth. So I write here volume is equal to length multiplied by depth multiplied by breadth. Here we have to calculate the value of depth. So D will be equal to volume divided by L cross B. Volume is given that is 264 meter cube and length is 44 meters multiplied by B is equal to 20 meters. So D will be equal to 0.3 meters and it remains constant. So I write here 0.3 meters. Next part B. The mass of seawater in pool is 2.70 into 10 to the power 5 kg. Calculate the density of the seawater. Here we have to calculate the density. Give your answer to three significant figures. Here we know that density is equal to mass per unit volume. Mass is given that is 2.70 into 10 to the power 5 divided by volume is equal to 264 meter cube. So density comes to be 1023 kg per meter cube and it is approximately equal to 1020. So I write here 1020 kilogram meter cube. Part C. Calculate the pressure due to the seawater at the bottom of pool. Here we have to calculate the value of pressure and pressure due to the seawater. It is the product of density, acceleration due to gravity and height or depth. So I write here rho, G and D, where D is the depth, it is also height. Density is 1023 or 1020. I write here 1023. Multiply the value of G is 10 and depth we already calculate. It is equal to 0.3 meter. So I write here 0.3. So the pressure comes to be 3100 Pascal. Part D. State a suitable instrument for measuring the dimension given in figure 1.1. So we can measure the dimension that is given in figure 1.1 by using the measuring tape. So I write here by using measuring tape. Question number 2, part A. State the two conditions which must be true for an object to be in equilibrium. Here we have to state the conditions of equilibrium. For a body to be in equilibrium, the net force acting on it must be equal to 0. So if I consider its object and there are two forces acting in this direction and two forces are acting in this direction. So you can see that all of these forces of equal magnitude and acting in opposite direction. That's why this cancels each other and the net force on this body must be equal to 0. So I write here the net force acting on the body must be equal to 0. For a body to be in equilibrium, the sum of all the forces acting on the body must be equal to 0. I write here no resultant force. Second condition is that the total clockwise moment will be equal to the total anti-clockwise moment. Or we can simply say that the sum of all moment must be equal to 0. So I write here clockwise moment must be equal to anti-clockwise moment. Part B. Figure 2.1 shows a uniform meter rule PQ in equilibrium. So here is a figure 2.1. We can see that it's a pivot point and it's a meter rule P and Q. The distance PU is 100 centimeter. The mass of the meter rule is 0.12 kg and its weight is W. So the distance from point P to Q is equal to 100 centimeter. And the pivot point is at distance of 10 centimeter from point P. And the pivot point is at 90 centimeter distance from point Q. Part 1. On figure 2.1, draw and label 1. An arrow to show the force W acting on PQ at the center of mass. Center of mass of this rod is actually the center of this rule. So it will be at 50 centimeter because the whole length of this meter rule is 100. So I divide it with 2. It will be 50 centimeter. At a distance of 50 centimeter from P point or Q point, center of mass of this rule exists. It is at this point. So an arrow to show the force weight W acting on PQ. So it is the force that is acting here and it is acting in downward direction. And we have to label it with W. Part 2. An arrow to show the force R acting on PQ at the pivot. So you can see here it's a pivot. And the force that acting on the pivot will be in upward direction. So it will be this and we have to represent it with R. Part 2. By taking moments about the pivot, calculate F. So going back to the diagram, we can see that there is a force that is acting in upward direction and there is also the force here that is acting in downward direction whose magnitude is 0.50 newtons. We have to calculate the magnitude of this force. So by using that the clockwise moment must be equal to the anti-clockwise moment, I write here net clockwise moment will be equal to net anti-clockwise moment So the clockwise movement caused due to weight, that is W here, and anti-clockwise movement is due to this F force and the force that is acting at point P. So I write here, and we know that the moment is the product of force and perpendicular distance from the pivot point. So when we have to calculate the moment for weight W, we know that it is at a distance of 40 centimeter. So the distance of pivot and W is 40 centimeter. We have to convert this distance into meters, and it will be 40 divided by 100, 0.4 meters. So R here is 0.4 meters, and in the case of weight, force is equal to weight and it is equal to mg. Mass of the meter rule is given, that is 0.12. So I write here 0.12 multiplied by 10, that is value of g, multiplied by perpendicular distance from the pivot point, and it is equal to 0.4 in the case of W. We also have to calculate the net anti-clockwise moment, and these anti-clockwise moment are caused by this force F and this force 0.5 Newton. So I multiplied this force F with the perpendicular distance from Q point to O. So this distance is basically equal to 90 centimeter and it is equal to 0.9 meter. So I multiply F with 0.9 plus there is also a force of 0.50 and it is at a distance of 10 centimeter. So I write here 0.50 multiply by 0.1, that is the perpendicular distance from pivot point. Here we have to calculate the value of F. It will be equal to 0.12 multiplied by 10 and 40 minus 0.50 multiplied by 0.1 divided by 0.9. So by solving, force comes to be 0.48 newtons. So I write here F is equal to 0.48 Newton. Part 3, calculate R. So we also have to calculate the value of R. R is actually the force that is acting at the pivot point. So we can calculate this value by assuming that the net upward forces will be equal to the net downward force. So I write here total upward forces will be equal to total downward forces. It is according to the condition of equilibrium that net force acting on this will be equal to 0. So we can see here that upward forces are this F and this R. So I write R plus F, we already calculate, it is 0.48. So R plus 0.48 will be equal to total downward force, and it is due to this W, and the other force is 0.50. So I write here W plus 0.50. Here we have to calculate the value of R. It will be equal to 0.50 plus W is 1.2 minus 0.48. That is the value of force. So the value of R comes to be 1.22 Newton. So I write here 1.22 Newtons. Question number 3. Figure 3.1 shows a gas contained in a cylinder enclosed by piston. So here is a figure 3.1 in which we can see that it's a gas that is in a cylinder, and there is also a pressure gauge that is attached with the cylinder, and the piston is also mentioned here. Part A. Describe in terms of momentum of molecules how a pressure is exerted on the walls of the cylinder. So we have to describe in terms of momentum that how the pressure is exerted on the walls of the cylinder. So we know that inside this cylinder these are gas particles and these collide with each other and also with the wall of this cylinder. When they collide with the wall of this cylinder, they change their direction at every collision. So there will be change in momentum. I write here, there will be change in momentum which is represented by delta P. And we know that change in momentum is equal to the product of force and time, or the rate of change of momentum is equal to force. I write here F cross T is equal to delta P. So when there is a change in momentum, there will be the force that these gas molecules exert. So when there is a force, we know that P, that is pressure, it is equal to force per unit area. When there is a force, there will be the pressure that is exerted by the gas molecules on the cylinder. So I write here, molecules move randomly and collide with walls of cylinder. When they collide with the wall of cylinder, they change their direction. So there will be the change in momentum. So I write here, change in momentum results in force due to this force, there will be the pressure that is exerted by the gas molecules on the cylinder. Because pressure is equal to force per unit area, so there will be pressure exerted on the walls of cylinder. Part B. The piston is pushed into the cylinder. The volume decreased from 820 cm3 to 330 cm3. The pressure gauge measures the pressure after compression as 20,000 Pascal. The temperature remains constant. Calculate the value of pressure before the gas was compressed. So we have to calculate the initial pressure. And here temperature is constant and volume and pressure changes. That's why we use the Boyle's law. According to Boyle's law, pressure is inversely proportional to volume when temperature kept constant. So I write here P is equal to K over V, where K is equal to PV and K is a constant. When I write for two gases, or when I write K is equal to P1 V1 and also K is equal to P2 V2. K is a constant, so P1 V1 will be equal to P2 V2. This is according to Boyle's law. Here we have to find out the value of P1, that is the pressure before gas was compressed. So I write here P1 is equal to P2, that is the pressure after the piston is pushed, V2 final volume and V1 is initial volume. So P1 will be equal to pressure is 20,000 multiplied by volume is 330 cm3 over V1 is 820 cm3. So pressure comes to be 8,000 Pascal. The unit of pressure is Pascal. Question number 4, part A. A student carries out an experiment to determine the thermal capacity of metal block. The block is heated by an electric heater for 23 minutes. The current in the heater is 3.0 ampere at a potential difference of 12 volts. The temperature of block rises from 20 degrees C to 70 degrees C. Calculate the thermal capacity of the block. So here we have to calculate the thermal capacity of block. Temperature change is given and also current, potential difference and time is given. So using the formula that energy is equal to C, that is thermal capacity, and delta T, that is change in temperature. So energy is the product of thermal capacity and change in temperature. Here we have to calculate the value of C. It will be equal to E over delta T. So we don't know the value of energy. First of all, we have to calculate energy. And we know that power is the rate of transfer of energy over time. So energy will be equal to power cross time. And power is the product of current and potential difference. V cross I current cross T, that is time. So by putting values here, energy will be equal to potential difference is 12 volt and value of current is 3.0 ampere multiplied by time is given 23 minutes, and we have to convert this into seconds. So I write 23 multiplied by 60. So energy comes to be 49680 joule. We put this value of energy into equation 1 so that we can determine the value of thermal capacity. So C will be equal to 49680 divided by, that is change in temperature, and the temperature change from 20 degrees C to 70 degrees C. So I write 70 minus 20 and it is 49680 divided by 50. So C comes to be 990 joule per degree C. I write here 990 joule per degree C. Part B. Two metal spheres of different diameters are heated at 900 degrees C in a hot oven. The two spheres are removed from the oven. State and explain any difference in the initial rate of emission of radiation of the thermal energy between the two spheres. So both of the spheres are made from metal and they have different diameters, and both of them are heated at 900 degrees C. It means that both of them are heated at the same temperature. The difference is that one metal sphere has diameter larger as compared to other. So I write here, if I consider sphere 1 and sphere 2. Diameter of sphere 1 is represented by D1, while for sphere 2 it is represented by D2. And temperature for both are same, that is 900 degrees C. So T2 is also equal to 900 degrees C. Now if I consider that diameter of D1, that is sphere 1, is greater than diameter of sphere 2, which is represented by D2. So what will be the effect on the emission of radiation? The sphere that has larger diameter will have greater surface area. It has larger surface area. So there will be greater rate of emission of thermal radiation for the sphere that has larger diameter. A1 is greater than A2. So the sphere that has larger cross-section area will emit most of the radiation. So I write here due to large surface area the sphere with greater diameter has large rate of emission of radiation. Part 2. One hot sphere is now heated in a hotter oven. State and explain any effect on the rate of emission of the radiation of thermal energy from that sphere when it is removed from the hotter oven. So here are two spheres. One is again heated while the other is removed. So if I consider that the sphere 1 is heated, it means that its temperature increases, while the sphere 2 is not heated, its temperature remains constant. So the sphere that is heated, it has large expansion. When we heat the sphere, then it will expand and there will be large diameter as compared to sphere 1. When there is a large diameter, so there will be the greater rate of emission of radiation. So I write here, rate of radiation is greater. Question number 5, part A. One difference between a longitudinal wave and a transverse wave is that a longitudinal wave consists of compressions and rarefactions. Part 1. Explain the term compression and rarefaction using the idea about particles. So we know that the longitudinal wave consists of compression and rarefaction. So the compression is the region where the particles are very close to each other, while the rarefaction is the region where the particles are further apart from each other. So I will draw here. So it's a longitudinal wave. We can see that this portion where the particles are closer to each other, it is compression. While this portion where particles are further apart from each other, it is rarefaction. So I write here compression, area where particles are closer together, while rarefaction is the area where particles are further apart. Part 2. Describe one other way in which longitudinal wave motion differs from transverse wave motion. So in the longitudinal wave, vibration of the particles is parallel to the direction of wave motion. If I consider that it's a string and one end of this string is attached with this while the other is free to move. So if I consider that at this end, I move the one end of string up and down. So wave travel in this direction, but I vibrate the particles up and down. So both of these are perpendicular to each other. There is an angle of 90 between them. So this is a transverse wave in which the particle of medium or vibration is created in the direction perpendicular to the direction of wave travel. Wave is traveling from left to right, while the vibration is created from down to up or up to down. So both of these are perpendicular to each other. It is transverse wave. Other possibility is that if I move this string in this direction, left or right, but the wave is also moved in right direction, just like this. So this kind of wave is known as longitudinal wave, because here you can see that it is the direction of travel of wave, while vibration is also produced in this direction. Both of these are parallel to each other. So I write here longitudinal wave motion, vibration are parallel to the direction of wave motion, while in the transverse wave, vibrations are perpendicular to the direction of wave motion. Part B. First part. A sound wave of frequency 0.120 kHz travels through a rock at a speed of 3500 meter per second. Calculate the wavelength of the wave. Here we have to calculate the wavelength when frequency and speed is given by using a relation that V is equal to f lambda. Here V is speed, f is frequency, and wavelength is represented by lambda. So we have to calculate the value of lambda. It will be equal to V over f. Speed is 3500 meter per second and frequency is given 0.120 kilohertz. We have to convert this into hertz. So I write here 0.120 multiplied by 10 की power 3, and it comes to be 120. So I write here 0.120 multiplied by 10 की power 3, and it is equal to 29 meter. So wavelength will be equal to 29 meter. Part 2. The wave travels from the rock into air. State and explain whether the wave will be audible to human ear. Statement and explanation. When the wave changes its medium, then there will be no effect on the frequency. Frequency remains same, just wavelength and speed changes. So we know that the human ear can hear the sound of frequency 20 to 20,000 Hz. So the frequency that is given here is 120. It is 120 Hertz. So 120 Hertz lies between 20 to 20,000 Hertz. That's why it is here by the healthy human ear. So I write here, yes, it is audible. So in the explanation I write because frequency remains same. That's why this frequency that lies from 20 to 20,000 Hertz is heard by the human ear. Question number 6, part A. Figure 6.1 shows an empty container and an observer's eye. There is a small coin at position O. The observer is unable to see the coin. So here is a figure 6.1 and the coin is at this position. There is the observer that is observing this coin, and this observer is unable to see this coin. The observer and the coin stay in the same position and the container is filled with water. First of all, container is empty and then we fill it with water. The observer cannot see the coin. Part 1, explain why the coin can be seen by the observer. So how the coin can be seen by the observer? So first of all, we can see here is a figure and the direction of the wave travel will be from this to this. It is represented by the dotted line. So first of all, I draw a surface. And draw normal to this surface. So we can see from here that the ray is coming and this is the incidence angle and this is a refracted angle. The ray is coming from water into air. It means from denser to rare medium. So this ray will bend away from normal. You can see that's why the bending will increase the angle of refraction as compared to angle of incidence. When a ray of light enters from denser to rare medium, it will bends away from normal. So this ray will be just like this. It bend away from the normal and this angle is the angle of refraction. So the angle of refraction is greater than angle of incidence. So we can see here that the refracted ray would be closer to the vision of person eye when it was before water present in the container. So this makes the person unable to see the coin. So I write here ray traveling from water to air makes the incident ray makes the refracted ray to bend away from normal. When it bent away from the normal, then the angle of refraction will be larger as compared to angle of incidence. So the refracted ray is closer to the vision of person when we fill the water. That's why the observer is able to see the coin. Part 2. State the name of wave process which occur as the light passes from water into air. So in a container we can see that it is filled with water and the ray of light entering from water into air. So it will bend away from the normal. It means that it changed its direction. So there will be the refraction. Part 3. Explain why the image of the coin is virtual image. Because it cannot be captured on the screen, so it's a virtual image. Part B. State the speed of light in air. So the speed of light is 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. I write here speed of light is equal to 3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. Part C. The refractive index of water is 1.3. Calculate the speed of light in water. Refractive index is given and we have to calculate the speed of light in water. We know that the refractive index is represented by n and it is the ratio C over V, where C is the speed of light in vacuum and V is the speed of light in any medium. In our case, the medium is water. So here we have to calculate the value of V. It will be equal to C over n, and C is speed of light in vacuum or air, that is 3 into 10 to the power 8, and refractive index is 1.3. So V comes to be 2.3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. I write here 2.3 into 10 to the power 8 meter per second. Question number 7, part A. Figure 7.1 shows a coil of wire wound on a thin plastic cylinder. The plastic has no effect on any magnetic field. The galvanometer is extremely sensitive. Here is the galvanometer, this one, and this is a coil which is wound on the plastic cylinder, and there is a small trolley over which there is also a magnet. A magnet is fixed to a small trolley that runs without friction on a track through the cylinder and coil. Part 1. The trolley is released from point A, so it runs through the coil from right to left. State and explain what is observed on the galvanometer. So we can see in a figure 7.1 that there is a trolley over which there is a magnet and it has two poles, north pole and south pole. So this trolley is moving towards this coil. When it moves toward this coil, then what will observe in the galvanometer? So here we use the Lenz's law. According to Lenz's law, the induced current always flow in direction such that it opposes the change that produces it. So first of all, you can see here is the magnetic poles, north and south pole. So when the trolley moves in this direction towards this coil, then some of its magnetic lines of force cutting the coil. So there will be the induced EMF. Due to this induced EMF, there is also the induced current, and this induced current is detected by the galvanometer that is attached there. So by using the Lenz's law, when this magnet moves towards the coil, then the face of the coil, that is here, becomes south pole and this becomes north pole because this is south. and this coil has to oppose the motion of the magnet. When magnet is moving towards the coil, then the face that is facing this magnet is south while the other is north, so that it can oppose the motion of the magnet that is moved towards it. So when this magnet is at this position, then it is again north and south. Now it is moving away from this coil, and this coil face will be here south and here north, because south pole will attract the north pole, so that magnet does not move far away from it. That's why this is north and it is south pole. So when the magnet here, it is south pole and it is north. Suppose that at this moment the deflection on galvanometer is on this side, while when the magnet move at this position, then the deflection of galvanometer will be opposite side. So the galvanometer deflection changes. So I write here, deflection is observed due to a change in magnetic field. Deflection is observed due to change in magnetic field. So change in magnetic field means that when the magnet is at this position, then its face this is south while this is north. But when the magnet come at this position, then the magnetic field changes. At this side it is south pole, while on this side it is north pole. So this change in magnetic field causes the deflection on galvanometer. Part 2. The trolley is now released from point B, so it runs through the coil from right to the left again. Show what is observed on the galvanometer and explain why it is different to your answer given in part A first. So here, when this trolley is released from point B, it is moving towards the coil, and everything remains same except that it accelerates as it moves towards the coil, and accelerates means that its velocity increasing, so its speed increase. So the galvanometer gives greater deflection when there is larger speed. I write here, galvanometer gives greater deflection because of high speed. Part B. Figure 7.2 shows an extension lead used to supply power to 3 kilowatt electric heater on a cool evening. State and explain 3 dangers with this arrangement. So we have to describe the 3 dangers. First of all, overheating of this lead may be very dangerous. It causes a short circuit. So I write here, first danger is overheating of the lead. Because it causes the short circuit. Danger 2 is that there is a damp grass and it can cause electrocution. So I write here, damp grass can cause electrocution. Third danger is that cut in insulation can also cause electrocution. So I write here, cut in insulation can cause electrocution. Question number 8, part A. A wire of length 2.0 meter and cross-section area of 0.40 millimeter square have a resistance of 0.14 ohms. Calculate the resistance of another wire of the same material of length 3.0 meters and cross-section area is 0.90 millimeter square. So here we have to calculate the resistance of other wire whose cross-section area and length is also given. We know that the formula of resistance R is equal to rho L over A, where rho is the resistivity, L is length and A is the cross-section area. And it is given that both wires are of same material. It means that resistivity for both of these remains constant because resistivity depends upon the material. In this case, the material is same. So I write here R1, that is for first wire, it will be equal to rho L1 over A1, and for second wire R2 is equal to rho 2 L2 over A2. So rho 1 is equal to rho 2, it is equal to rho because the resistivity of both of these are the same, as it is depending upon the material which is same. So I write here rho 1 will be equal to rho, it will be equal to R1 A1 over L1. From second equation I write rho 2 is equal to rho and it is equal to R2 A2 over L2. So when both of these resistivities are same, their right hand side also be same. I write here R1 A1 over L1 is equal to R2 A2 over L2. From here we have to find out the resistance of second wire R2. So by putting values, R1 is given 0.14 ohms, 0.14 multiplied by area is 0.40 millimeter square. First of all, we have to convert this into meter square. So I write 0.40 multiplied by 10 की power minus 3 square. It is because of this square. So it also be equal to 0.40 multiplied by 10 की power minus 6. I write here 0.40 into 10 की power minus 6 divided by length is given, that is 2.0 meters. It is equal to R2 we have to find out, and A2 is 0.90 millimeter square. So I write here 0.90 multiplied by 10 की power minus 6 divided by length is 3.0 meters. So R2 will be equal to, this cancels by this, and 0.14 into 0.4 multiplied by 3.0 divided by 2.0 multiplied by 0.90. So it comes to be 0.093 ohms. That is the resistance of second wire, 0.093 ohms. Part B. A student is designing a digital electronic circuit. Figure 8.1 shows her partly completed circuit. Here is the figure 8.1 and we can see that there are two inputs A and B, and these inputs are combined to give output C and D, and then C and D becomes input and they combine to give the output O. Part 1. Table 8.1 is a truth table. Complete the columns in this truth table to show the values for input B in the circuit. So we have to complete the truth table. And here we can see that C is the output of A and B when we apply NOR gate. it is NOR gate, and it is the combination of NOT and OR gate. So if I consider point C and input A, we know that it is NOR gate. So here inputs are given, that is A input, and output is given. We have to find out the values of input B. So first of all, I draw the truth table for NOR gate. If I consider that it is input A, it is input B, and it is X, that is equal to A or B, and this is output C, which is equal to A or B, and I apply NOT over it. So first of all, inputs are 0 0 and 1 1. Then the inputs are 0 1 0 1. So when we apply OR gate, then the output will be high when any one of the input is high. So here 0 represents low and 1 represents high. 1 is the high input. When low input combined with low, it gives low output. And if any one of the input is high, the output will be high in OR gate. So I write here 1 because here 1 is high. And it is also 1, so I write here 1, and 1 1 also gives 1. When we apply NOT over it, it means that we have to change 1 into 0 and 0 into 1. So I write here 1, 0, 0 and 0. So it is the truth table of NOR gate. Now we can compare here that when output is 1, it is first case. Then the inputs are 0 0. So I write here 0. Second case, when output is 0 and input is 1. So A input is 1 and output is 0. So this is third one case, when the second input also equal to 0. So I write here 0. And this 0 is when input also equal to 0. This input is equal to 0 and output also equal to 0. It means that the input B is equal to 1. So I write here 1. And last one case, when input is 1 and output is 0. So there is only one case remaining, that when input is 1 and output is 0. So we can see from here, it is the output 0 and it is input 1. So the input of B also be equal to 1. That's why I write here 1. So it will be 1. Part 2. The column O is the truth table, shows the desired output values for the circuit. On figure 8.1, complete the circuit to achieve these output values. Label any gate used. So first of all, we can see that the input C and D combines and gives the output O. So first of all, checking the input C and D, when both of the inputs are 0 0, output is 1. So it is the first case. When both of the inputs are 0, output is 1. In all other cases, it is also 0. Second one, both of the inputs are 0 and output is equal to 1. So it is also the first one case. Second is that when input is 0 1, input is 0 1, output is 0. And last one is inputs are 1 and 0 the output is 0. So this is basically for NOR gate. C and D. Here is NOR gate and then it gives the output O. So we have to draw here NOR gate. It will be, so first of all I use a ruler. So here I have to draw the NOR gate. It is NOT gate. This bubble shows the NOT gate and the output of this is represented by O. So it is input C and it is input D. So this is a complete circuit diagram for this. I write here, this is NOR gate. Question number 9, part A. Describe what is meant by the term electric field. So electric field is the area or space where a charge experiences a force. So I write here, area or space where a charge experiences a force is called electric field. Part B. Figure 9.1 shows two parallel conducting plates connected to a battery. On figure 9.1, draw 5 lines to show the electric field pattern between the two plates. So here we have to show the pattern of electric field. So here we can see in a figure 9.1 that it's a battery. One terminal is at high potential while the other is at low potential. So it is positive and it is negative. And these are also two conducting plates that is attached with the battery. And we have to draw the direction of electric field there. We know that the electric field originates from the positive side and end at the negative side. So I am going to draw these lines. So these are the electric field and we also have to show its direction. So this is positive terminal, it means that this is positive and it is negative. And these lines originate from positive, so its direction will be this. So moving towards the next part of this question, part C. When fully charged, a 1.2 volt rechargeable battery can deliver a current of 210 milliampere for 10 hours. Part 1. Calculate the charge that can be delivered by the full charged battery. Here we have to find out the value of charge when the current, time and potential is given. So we know that current is the rate of flow of charges Here we have to find out the value of Q. It will be the product of current and time. The current is 210 milliamperes. First of all, we have to convert this into ampere. So I write 210 multiplied by 10 की power minus 3 amperes. So it will be 210 into 10 की power minus 3 ampere multiplied by time is 10 hours. And we have to convert this time into seconds. So I write here 10 multiplied by 60 and this become minutes. And to convert this minutes into seconds, I again multiply it with 60. So I write here 10 multiplied by 60 and again with 60 seconds. So 10 hours is equal to 10 cross 60 multiplied by 60. So I write here multiply this value, I write here 10 multiplied by 60 and 60. So the value of charge comes to be 7600 coulombs. I write here 7600 coulomb. Part 2. Calculate the energy stored in the battery when fully charged. Here we have to calculate the value of energy stored, and energy E is equal to charge multiplied by potential difference, and here charge that we already calculate, it is equal to 7600 multiplied by value of V is given in question, it is 1.2 volt. So that energy comes to be 9100 joule. So I write here energy stored is equal to 9100 joules. Next part is state the type of energy stored when the battery is fully charged. So the chemical energy is stored in the battery. I write here chemical energy. Question number 10, part A. The nucleus of hydrogen atom is a proton. The mass of proton is m and the size of charge on proton is E. Complete table 10.1. Express your answers in terms of m and E. 3 spaces have already been completed. So here is a table 10.1 in which particles are emission is proton, neutrons, gamma rays, and nucleus of helium-4, that is He, with atomic number 2 and mass number 4. So we have to complete this table. Proton has mass m and charge E. Similarly, the neutron has mass m, and we know that neutron is neutral. It does not have any charge. So charge here will be equal to 0. Next is gamma rays. Gamma rays are electromagnetic rays. These are chargeless and they don't have any mass and they move with the speed of light. So their mass is also equal to 0 and charge is also equal to 0. Nucleus of helium-4. So here is a helium 4 and 2. We have to calculate the total mass of helium. So we can see here that it is the atomic number. Here atomic number is equal to 2. While mass number is equal to 4. And atomic number is basically equal to the number of protons. So we have to calculate the number of neutrons here, and it is represented by A. So I write here mass number is equal to Z is atomic number plus number of neutrons. So it is 4. It will be equal to atomic number is 2 plus N. So that the number of neutrons comes to be 4 minus 2 is equal to 2. So here are 2 number of neutrons and 2 number of protons. So the total mass will be 4 multiplied by m, that is equal to 4m, which is the mass of 2 protons and 2 neutrons. I write here 4m. We also have to find out the charge. Charge on the helium is 2e because there are 2 protons. and there is no charge on the neutron is neutral, that's why the charge on the alpha particles, that is helium, is 2e. So next part B. Many schools and colleges use radioactive isotopes for teaching and research. Describe how these radioactive isotopes are handled, used, and stored in safe way. So we can handle these radioactive isotopes using tongs and gloves. So I write here handle radioactive isotopes using tongs and gloves for limited time. And second thing is that store these in lead container.